All right, well, welcome everyone to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome everyone to this Q&A. I won't say a question came in, but say more of an observance, something that I saw earlier, which will be a good segue here, and that is that someone had asked the question. Is it permissible? Is it permissible to pray that they should die? Kind of a morbid, topic, but whatever. It's a good question. It's a good question. In other words, extending life. Do we say it's ever good to extend life, or want to extend life if a person suffers? Right. That's part of the question. I guess I would say part of the question as well. So the Gemara brings down by Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Judah the Prince, and he was suffering. Right, he was suffering tremendously. And there was a question that people should pray that he should die. He's going through excruciating, whatever. It's going through, it's going through a lot of hardship, right? Tremendous amount of hardship, right? So there's a question that better that he die rather than suffer. Now the question is that permissible or not? Right, because essentially you never hasten someone's death. That you're not allowed to do. That's called murder, whether a Jew does it or a non-Jew does it. At the same time, if the Mishnah says if a person is supposed to die, and someone's banging with a hammer and that's stopping them from dying, so you tell the person to stop. Right. So on the one hand, you're not allowed to hasten someone's death, pull the plug, take out the what do you call it? Someone has a pacemaker, cut off the pacemaker, that's murder. Right. At the same time, if a person should die, right, really should die, and something is preventing them from dying in general, then we hold that you got to stop and let the person die. So it goes two ways, right? One way is you can't hasten the death. On the other hand, the person's supposed to die. Whatever the impediment is that's stopping the person from dying, then you stop. Then you stop in order that person should die. So no one should ever have a death wish. I mean, very hard things that people go through, which is understandable. It's always it's always a last resort. I mean, it should be a last resort. It shouldn't be something that is done. It's a horrific sin if someone kills themselves. Let's say it's a horrific sin for a Jew and for a non-Jew. For that matter. So we'll break down the question like this: if a person, let's say they have they have an illness that is terminal, right? They know they're going to die. It's only a matter of time, and they might go through great suffering. Now, in such a case, does that person have an obligation to jump through hoops in order, to take all kinds of medication, prolong their life? right? That's one question. And it depends, it depends on the person, because essentially not, let's say, taking medication is not the same as taking a pill, committing suicide, right? Or doing something else. In other words, they're preventing themselves, from not, let's say they don't take the medication, right? They don't take the medication. So that's not active. That's not an active thing. That would not be called suicide. So I had a case, or I knew of a case, where somebody had a kidney transplant, and 25, 30 years later, the other kidney doesn't, it's not functioning well. So basically, they had a choice. They weren't a candidate for what do you call it? For have another kidney transplant. So they had to go on dialysis. Anyone knows about dialysis, it's not a great way to live, but it will keep you alive. But certainly will keep you alive for a number of years. Now, I thought it was very draining, painful, but be that as it may, what if a person decides, okay, they don't want to go on dialysis, right? They decide they don't want to go on dialysis. They're not a recipient. They're not a candidate to receive a kidney, right? So they're not a kidney. If they're not a candidate to receive a kidney, they don't go on dialysis. What is going to happen? They will die. That's essentially what will happen. Now, this is not something active. They are not doing something to help themselves. So the question is, if that's not something active, do we look at that as being suicide or not? And the answer is no. Right? Answer is no. We have a source for that, because in the time of the destruction of the temple, Second Temple, there were 400 kids on a boat that were being taken to Rome, and they understood that they were going to be abused. So they all decided to jump overboard and drown. Right? There's a different issue. I mean, I shouldn't say different issue, but the source over here is, instead of being abused, they took their lives. Right? So in that case, even though it's what we call in the Gadata, it's a homiletic, Gemara that we don't normally learn Jewish law from. The Rambam, who's the base of all Jewish law that we have, the Rambam doesn't bring this down. Right? He doesn't record it. So I remember asking my Rabbi this question, and his answer is that he said, you don't have to go through heroics. You for sure don't have to go through heroics, right? But over here, you see, they knew they were going to be abused. They took their lives. The Gemara does not say. The Gemara could have easily said, why is that suicide? That is suicide, right? People in Masada with suicide. So why is that looked at as suicide? So he says, very, very simple. The Gemara learns out the fact that since, they did not want to be abused. So the Gemara does not look at that as suicide. So there are a few things here. One is you do something direct, right? Something direct, or a cause of something, right? Could be considered taking a life if it's direct. At the same time, let's say it's indirect, right? This is a whole major discussion. Person, let's say, shoots an arrow in the air. The wind takes the arrow and it kills somebody. The wind takes the arrow, someone gets hit by the arrow, and the person dies. Now, is the person who shot the arrow guilty? So you say, shot it in the air, it's his action. Good. But the wind actually took it. So the question is it really his action? Or the fact that the wind took it, it's really partially his action, not really his action. That ended up doing it. Or whatever, this is a whole discussion. right? It's called, that the Gemara asks the question, is it called, his power or not? Is it direct or is it indirect? There are a lot of different ramifications. One would be, let's say you tied someone up, or someone, not you, somebody tied someone up on a railroad track. And the train is coming. It's not here yet. But for sure the train is coming. So the person is tied up on the railroad tracks. You don't see the train coming, but he's coming in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. So then there's the whole question, is he guilty? Train runs over the person, kills him. Is he guilty? You say, of course. He set him up there. Right? He set him up there. And we know the train is coming, but the train's not here yet. But even if it's coming, there's a whole discussion with that. Or let's say something more direct. 35 degrees Celsius, it's 100 degrees. You tie someone up, he can't get anywhere, he's going to die of dehydration. That's direct. That 100% is direct. So let's say a few hours earlier, person gets tied up somewhere, God forbid, right? Someone ties them up, but it's not 100 degrees yet. 75, San Diego weather, 75 and sunny. Beautiful. Yeah, but it's going to get hotter later. It's going to reach 100 degrees in a couple hours. But what he did right now, not direct. Right? Certainly not direct. But you're going to say, he knew the sun was coming, it was going to get hotter. It was going to get stronger. And that person's going to die. Let's say, for all intents and purposes, it's going to die. That's very clear. So the sun is up, but it's not as powerful. So at this point, is he guilty? Not guilty. Person can sit there for a while, nothing's going to happen because it's not that hot. But a few hours later, gets to 35 degrees Celsius, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, give or take 104 or whatever it is, right? 100 degrees Fahrenheit. He's going to sit out there for a while, going to bake. A die of dehydration. But it's not direct, right? So this whole discussion, what's considered direct, what's considered not direct. So that's one thing, right? That's one thing whether it's considered murder, or not. In this case, right, I just wanted to go through that. But the question was, are you allowed to pray? Are you allowed to pray
Amen.
for someone to die, or for themselves to die? What's say better? Or someone else, doesn't matter. For someone else because of their pain they're going through. So we have a case where what happens is case of review on us. You see in such a case where someone's suffering, that it would be permissible to pray for them to die. In this case, again, we're not relying on miracles. The person's going to die. We can pray, a person can say, well, the person shouldn't suffer anymore. Okay. But if a person's in serious pain, that's the question. That's the question, whether you are allowed to pray for them, to die or not. Certainly, we'll make it very easy. So, someone causes damage, let's say, and even serious damage, can't pray that God should kill them. As we mentioned many times before, God will open up your file first. You'll say, hey, what right you have to want someone else to die? Let's see where you're holding in the world. And if you're holding somewhere in the world, good, then maybe we'll listen. If not, your file gets opened first. That's never good. Your file only wants to be opened on Rosh Hashanah. That's it, right? So it also looks like a lack of emunah. And the reason it looks like a lack of proper faith that God runs the world is because it's basically you're saying he's not doing his job. And God's not doing his job. Because you're saying the person should suffer very good because of what he did. You don't think God's going to take care of him. So why are you invoking that God takes care of you? Yeah, sorry, care of him. Right? So seemingly it's a lack of emunah. At the end of the day, we can pray that God takes away someone's suffering. That we can do. That it takes away the suffering. Now, directly to pray that they should die because of the suffering. So you see, there is a precedent. Because in such a case, and that's a question comes up a lot, someone, seemingly suffering or dying or whatever, people will say, what's the point of praying? They're terminal. True, right? Let's say that's true. I'm not saying the doctors know everything, but let's say they got this right. Person's terminal, going to die a month, 2 months, they give it 6 months maximum, right? Let's say they get it right. Okay. Now, in such a case, you can pray the person doesn't suffer. That suffering should stop. But, there was a case. There was a case a while ago. I think I told the story that there was somebody that had COVID and was in a coma for a long time, for a very long time. And there was a learning center that was learning for his recovery. And the family, like after a year and a half, I don't remember what it was, came to them and said, stop. He's never coming out of it. If he comes out of it, be a vegetable. Like, there's no point to continue praying. So this person wanted to take responsibility. So I went to my Rabbi to ask him a question. All right, the Rabbi going to Moshe Shlita should be well. And asked him this question. So he basically said, what do the doctors know? You keep praying for him. You keep praying for him. You don't stop. Because you can invoke divine mercy, and God can take it away. God can make the person wake up. So even in such a case where a person's been in a coma for a year and a half, he said, you can still pray. The person woke up the next day. Kind of uncanny. Woke up the next day. Now, that being said, so I see him on a daily basis. Not now, but whatever. After a Passover, go back to my regular schedule. Comes in a couple of times, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, almost every day he's there. Right? For an hour or two learning. First of all, ever walk again. There's hope for that. But he woke up. He's got brain function. Function other ways. He's not where he used to be, that's for sure. Right? That's for sure. But in such a case, could have been. He's in a coma. They let's say take him off ventilator or whatever. That could be murder. But God can always have mercy. Even if a person is, what do you call it? Even if they're in a coma for a long time, doctors giving up hope. There's divine mercy. Right? But again, there is a precedent that someone suffering that, God should take away the suffering. I mean, it can be done in 2 ways. Either takes away suffering, person gets better, or take away suffering, the person dies. Somebody asked, can we never see a human die ever again? God decided if we live or die. No. The only case you'd be allowed to do that is, we always say you got to put your best foot forward. Now, putting your best foot forward putting your best foot forward means that a person's sick. What do? They see a doctor. Now, if a person would never rely on doctors, right, their whole lives, or for however long, they never see a doctor, they never put their best foot forward, then they can do it, right? Then essentially they can do it. Is anyone on the level today, like that? No, a person's sick, they see a doctor. Right? That's just kind of foolhardy. Unless the person has, unbelievable amount of, faith and belief in God, even in previous generations, where you had, unbelievable rabbinic scholars. They went to doctors. Like, the Vilna Gaon, who was very big, that, he held, you don't put your best foot forward. That's what he held. But again, for himself, not for others. Meaning, if there were, I think it was his brother. I think it was his brother that, didn't want to go see a doctor, wanted to be on this level. And he said you can only do that if you're holding there, and that's what you've been doing for however long. But if before you went to see doctors, you can't do that. I mean, nobody would say today, if you're sick, never go to a doctor. No one would say that. Right? So basically, if a person's sick, you see a doctor. I mean, again, doctors aren't infallible. Doctors don't know everything. They call it the way they see it, whatever, based on, medicine or whatever. But still, person's sick, you see a doctor. Right? No one's on that level today. And I remember when it came, this is more about livelihood. Do I have to put my best foot forward or not? Can I just, sit and learn all day? Say to him or whatever, God will take care of my needs. So the difference of opinion between the Vilna Gaon and Elijah Vilna was the memory and the Chovos HaLevavos. Chovos HaLevavos holds in duties of the heart, you put your best foot forward. That's what you got to do. You got to put your best foot forward. The Vilna Gaon held not that way. The Vilna Gaon held, if you're on the level, on a very high level, then you don't have to put your best foot forward. God will take care of your needs. So remember, when it came to livelihood, so many, many years ago, so I asked my Rabbi this question. He goes, and he's the 8th-generation descendant of the Vilna Gaon through his mother. And I asked him this question, and he said, you got to reach Shabbos. You got to put your best foot forward. So I said, what about the Vilna Gaon? So I said, you're an 8th-generation descendant, of the Vilna Gaon. So he said, you got to put your best foot forward. But that's what we would say to everybody. Right? I don't. There are no exceptions. There are no exceptions. It's certainly not in this generation. There were people in previous generations. They did minimal things to put their best foot forward, and God took care of their needs. And some of them lived in abject poverty. That's the way they wanted to live. Okay, they made a choice. But for the average person, you got to put your best foot forward. Right? When it comes to livelihood, it comes to health, that's what you got to do. Again, doctors are not the one that heals. They can only heal the flesh wounds. But on the inside, they can't heal. Right? They can stitch the person up. They can do the surgery. They'll say, okay, we did everything we can. Because they know they have no guarantee. They don't want to get sued either. Right? But they know there's no guarantee after they sewed up the person what's going to happen. They can say, this is what should happen. The person's relatively healthy or not healthy or whatever. They can say according to statistics what should happen. Okay. They can guess. They may have a good way of guessing. Okay. There's no guarantee. And I'm sure there are many times what they said didn't happen. Either they said the person's going to get better and they got sick and they died, or just the opposite. Or they said there's no hope and the person got better. The person walked out, supposed to be, brain damage and who knows what. And, they walked out, without a scratch. Or not without a scratch, but they came out of it when they never expected. So they're not, they're not prophets by any stretch. They call it the way they see it, but they can only heal something on the outside. This is the whole point, because whatever's on the inside, they can cut and sew and do all this, but they can say this could happen, that could happen, the other thing could happen, but can they say 100% for sure? They can't say 100% for sure. No possible way to say 100% for sure, because they for sure could be wrong. They can say according to this it should happen, according to that should happen, good, but they can't say for sure, right? So simple answer is that when it comes to us, certainly this generation, even in previous generations, no one's at that level today. No one's at that level. They're not seeing doctors. They could make the decision. They could make the decision that they don't want to do anything. Okay, that's their choice. That's not suicide. They just don't want to go further and do anything. Somebody asks, what if someone commits suicide because they had a mental disorder? That's a different issue. And let's understand like this: for a Jew, if a person commits suicide, they're not buried in the Jewish cemetery. There are no mourning customs. You don't get up at resurrection of the dead. Pretty severe prohibition even for a non-Jew. But I would say that most people that commit suicide have some sort of mental health issue. So therefore, they will be allowed to be buried in the Jewish cemetery. There will be mourning customs. Because it's an absolute last resort. I get it. People have, difficult lives and what they've been through and this and that. But that's a pretty drastic thing. It's a pretty drastic thing, to do. And most people won't do it. They won't do it because, there's still some value in life. It doesn't give you a right to take your own life, but in any case, someone's going to do it. We hold, practically speaking, today, that in most cases, it's a mental health issue. There is some sort of mental health issue. So we don't look at it as suicide. How is God going to judge them if they do it? Okay, first of all, it's not called suicide, right? Because they're a mental health issue, right? That's the first thing. Second thing, so you're asking, how's God going to judge that? Well, we took away the big problem. It's called suicide. That people can have terminal disease. Let's say they could have a terminal disease and they don't want to live. Now, let's say they do something and they end up killing themselves. They never have a mental health issue here, per se. But what did they do? They ended their life. So you can say, well, what about that? So again, for most cases today, we're going to look at it like it's not suicide. So if it's not suicide, then the judgment is much less. If someone has PTSD or some mental health issue, I don't think there's any question. I don't think any question would be called suicide. There's something else going on. They're not in their right mind in general. They've had other things happen where the mind doesn't function the way it should. And again, even if people have suffered a lot, plenty of people suffer a lot, go through a lot of difficulty and a lot of hardship. Okay, but at the end of the day, what's going to happen? What's going to happen if someone, God forbid, pulls that trigger? That's like an absolute last resort. I don't care how bad their life is. Yeah, it's an absolute last resort. But someone who's going to do it, there's something wrong. There is something wrong with it. Because there's so many reasons to live. Again, people go through horrific, terrible hardship. True. That's all true. But to do something that drastic is drastic. But again, if someone has, someone who says PTSD or they're bipolar or schizophrenic, right, and they do it, they're not in the right mind. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, but in this case, they're not in the right mind. So it's not going to be called suicide. So, why did they get it? Why did God give it to them? So to speak, and how he deals with it? Good. It's a good question. That's a good question. a person can have, certain disorders because their soul has to go through it. I mean, so their soul suffers in this world, and that'll be the atonement. Because they have to go through all kinds of things. They have to deal with family, crazy family things. They have to deal with all kinds of upheavals. Who knows what they are? Whatever they are, whatever the hardship is, right? Part of it is going to be because the soul has to go through it. Yeah, and the soul has to suffer. Going through it. That could be atonement in of itself, just by, mental health issues. Someone asked, how do you invoke God's mercy? So I'll tell you, the easiest way is to pray and say, God, you're the one in charge. You are the one in charge. I can't do anything without you. Right? As the Chofetz says in the gate of taking a self-accounting. Yeah, he says the 30th way to do it is to understand it's you and God, the world. Everyone else is background noise. Right? Everyone else is background noise. Nobody can do good or bad to a person unless God wants it to. Right? So someone affects you, it's God using them as a stick to get to you. Very good. So now a person's down and out. Remember, the Gemara says, if you want to go on the right path, God will help you. If you want to go on the wrong path, God won't stop you. So if a person does mitzvahs, it'll cause them to do other mitzvahs. God will see them in a different light. They're working, going in the right direction. Doesn't mean that they don't fall short. Doesn't mean they don't, reach potential or any of that. They have ups and downs. First of all, I got to go in the right direction. You have to want to go in the right direction because, a person's sin is going to cause them to sin more, right? So there's always a balance, right? It's a balance between the body and the soul, right? If a person goes according to the soul, wants to do what God wants, very good, right? That's going to elevate the body, elevate the soul. If a person goes in the wrong direction, you debase the body, you debase the soul, right? So to invoke divine mercy, you have, a person has to say, I'm in an infinitesimally small speck of cosmic dust. What I do doesn't matter. I'm trying. I want to draw close to you. And I want you to take X, Y, Z away from me. Right? Whatever hardship a person goes through. And a person has to say 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day, you are the one in charge. And I can't do anything without you. Now, we can say that. We can, really mean it. But then we go back to doing the stupid things that we do. And that's certainly not good in God's eyes. So God's like, why should I answer? You keep doing the same thing over and over again. You're not helping. You're not helping yourself in this process, right? So how's the person going to invoke divine mercy? One of them is to say, like King David said himself, I'm nothing more than a worm. I don't deserve help, right? But, King David says, I don't deserve help. Says it many times. And he says, but you're going to help me anyway, even if I don't deserve help, right? So first thing is to admit that God's in charge. I can't do anything without you. Right? You are the one that calls the shots. I'm putting my best foot forward. Maybe I need to do more. Maybe I need to work harder. Good. Right? That's all good. But I still have to do it. Right? And God can have mercy. Person, if they make themselves subservient. Again, I'm not going to say it's going to happen overnight. I'm not going to say it's, hocus pocus and it's abracadabra and all this. You got to work, right? A good thing to invoke divine mercy is the holiness of the text of saying the book of Psalms, saying Tehillah. Yeah, but I would say to pray from the depths of the heart, right? You can admit I make mistakes. Yeah, I'm not doing what I should. I have to be better. You can pray that God help you. That God should help you. We say in the 4th paragraph of the Shemona Esrei, silent meditation, whatever you want to call it, right? That we say, God should give me knowledge. And if he didn't give me knowledge, what am I, a dimwit? I'm an imbecile? I'm a doofus? So to speak? No, I'm talking about spiritual knowledge. And, it doesn't say God should give it to me, should grant it. You have to want it. You have to want spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge, is hard. Learning Torah is hard. It's one of the 3 things that are very hard to acquire, right? In this world. Torah, Olam Haba, the next world, and Eretz Yisrael, right? In the land of Israel. So, person has to learn humility. They have to be humble. They have to know who gives them life. They have to know who takes care of them, even if it's hard. and a person goes through unbelievable hardship. That doesn't matter, right? Who takes care of your needs? You're not living on the street, right? Person not starving. Most people not starving. I mean, it could be worse. Don't ask how. It could be worse. Al tiftach peh l'satan. We don't open our mouths to Mr. S, even Kodesh, angel of death, whatever you want to call him. We never open our mouth to him. Think about it. It could be worse. The Vilna Gaon, in blessed memory, would have his students who were suffering from abject poverty. He sent them to hospitals before Shabbos. Now, they were starving. They had a lot of hardship. But they saw people that were in pain. They saw people who couldn't take care of their own needs. Now, they came into Shabbos like as angels because they don't have that issue. I mean, okay, they don't have a lot of food, suffering in other ways. But think about it. They can get out of bed. They can go like this, no arthritis, right? They can do other, they can take care of their needs. They're not wallowing in pain. That's huge. That is huge. Again, everyone according to whatever hardship they have. It can always be worse. And I would say, don't open up your mouth. Well, how much worse could it be? Yeah, look at what's going on in the world in general. A lot of places, there's starvation, wars, all kinds of things going on that are like man's inhumanity, man, in many ways. And if you don't have that, and you haven't been uprooted, and you're not running for your life, it's huge. We take that for granted. Because I live in a normal place. Thank you very much. Yeah. Things get worse before they get better, but again, could always be worse. Always be worse. Somebody asked, when Andrew writes, Torah scroll. Is it forbidden for a Jew to use? Of course it's forbidden. What's the question? It will be a vessel for idol worship. That's not even the question. Well, it's part of the question, right? The question is, they write Shem Hashem. They write God's name. They have no intention for God's name. So you can take that and throw it in the toilet. Burn it, right? A heretic. A Jewish heretic. Yeah, not even talking about someone who worships idols. He's a heretic, doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe in Torah. He wrote a Torah scroll. What does the Gemara say? What do you do with it? You burn it. Why do you burn it? Because there's no holiness in it. There's no holiness in it. So all the more so if an Andrew wrote it. So if an Andrew wrote it, it's already not going to have intention for the right thing, right? And you have to have intention. You have to go to the mikveh and have intention when you say God. When you write God's name. They're not going to know what they're doing anyway, so that'll knock it out either way, right? They're not going to know how to write it properly. That's one thing. Second thing is, even using, writing God's name has no holiness in it. You take it, throw it in the garbage. It's not worth anything. If it's like your Jew wrote it, it's all the same thing. They don't have the knowledge. And if they have the knowledge, when they wrote God's name, what was their intention? Then the whole thing, you throw it away. They for sure didn't have the intention. Right? So that goes in the garbage. Is it permit? What if a no-hide writes Sefer Torah? What's the difference? He's also not going to have the right intention. But he won't know what he's doing, so what's the point? He's never going to know what to do. Right? Even if he's not an idolater. So, okay, makes it a little bit better. Makes it a little better. So you say, what if he learned all the laws and someone was watching him? Doesn't matter. Non-Jew can't write a Sefer Torah. Non-Jew in any way, shape, or form cannot write a Torah scroll. Is it permitted to put an animal that had been mortally injured out of its misery? Yes. 100%. Or suffering. Someone that's had to put their dog down. It was more of a therapy dog. Whatever. Had this dog for many, many years and just whatever, got sick. Got sick, and it was just, a horrible thing to say. And they put it down. Right? So you're definitely allowed to. It's sad, but that you're allowed to do. That you're allowed to do if it's injured. Let me see other questions here. One second. No, it's part of an army. He kills someone, is that murder? No. Even if a Jew kills, it's not murder. Why? They're defending the country. Or invading another country. I don't know. Let's say they're a mercenary. I guess that'd be a different issue. But you need a standing army. 100%, you need a standing army. Let's say wherever you live needs a standing army. You kill people. Yeah. How could someone be a policeman? Yeah. Or say a firefighter, dangerous profession. Yeah. So you have to. Because even if they're in the profession, that's not mean they're going to die, but it's potential. It's a danger. You can't do things that are dangerous, but you need people that are willing to sacrifice their lives. Because if you didn't have people that were willing to do that, then it'd be total chaos, much worse. Yeah. Yeah, see what goes on. These idiots wanted to fund the police. Well, what do you think is going to happen if they fund the police? It'd be chaos. It'd be worse chaos than it is today. Much worse. Much worse. So even if they have to kill people, it's permissible, right? That's part of the job, right? And the line of defense doesn't mean, it doesn't mean they're going to have to, but if they do, if they have to, self-defense, not a problem. What if it's not self-defense? Good, right? That's a good question. Someone pulls something, they don't see what it is, they think it's a gun, they shoot them, right? They shoot them. So that's called self-defense. So that'll go to trial because the person never had a gun. Or here in Israel, there was a case that a soldier, 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid, there was a terrorist down, and the terrorist tried to get up. The soldier thought he had a gun, didn't have a gun, shot him, killed him. Yeah, while he was already down. So this gets a little bit dicey. Or whatever you want to call it, because it wasn't a threat, right? It wasn't a threat, essentially. But he thought he was. So, he lunged out, he thought he had something, and he shot him. Now, these terrorists deserve to die. I don't think there's any question. So if they're injured, can you kill them? No. If you kill them, good, you kill them. But if they're injured, you can't kill them unless they're a threat to your life. So in this case, I think he got a few months in jail because he ended up killing someone that didn't have a weapon, and he was down, but even though he lunged out, it doesn't really matter, right? So yeah, it's kind of tricky here because, he has a right to self-defense, no question, right? So according to Torah, seemingly that wouldn't be called murder. That wouldn't be called murder. That was self-defense. But you can say, okay, he's an 18, 19-year-old kid. He panicked. Good. He panicked. But I don't think we'd look at it as, we would look at it as murder. But, it's even worse because, you have these terrorists. Let's say they don't kill them. They go to Israeli hospitals, and they get treated and their lives are saved many times. Now, that's the whole question. Can you treat them? This person came, let's say he killed people even. Not that he tried to kill people. Let's say he killed people. They injured him. They didn't kill him. Whatever reason, they didn't end up killing him. Okay. Well, they injured him. Would you allow, as a doctor, let's say that, doctor is a religious Jew. Yeah? He's a religious Jew. Is he allowed to save his life? Well, look what happened to Sinwar. They saved his life. This maggot. They saved his life. Right? Brain tumor or whatever. They saved him. They saved his life. And look what happened. So, okay. So you tell me, Israel's not being run according to Jewish law. Then you're going to have to make distinctions. Well, what did the person do? If the person killed somebody, even though they're never going to change, now they're injured, I have an obligation to, to save them. If it's the law of the land, you don't do it, what happens? Go to jail, lose your practice, right? Won't be able to doctor again. Or whatever, not a simple question. Definitely not a simple question. But, you got to ask the question, like, they think we're so, we're doing genocide and doing this and doing that. They're like, they're saving people's lives that they don't deserve to be saved. So you have to say, well, they didn't have hands on the bullet. Then sorry, blood on their hands. The way you draw the line, attempted murder, attempted trying to kill people, but they didn't. And now they're injured because they tried and they failed, and now they come in the hospital. You have to save them. That's crazy. It's a crazy idea, right? According to Jewish law, it says you have to save them. Why don't you save them? You get an Arab doctor, he's a surgeon. Why not save him? Why is it, a Jew has to save him after what he tried to do? All the more so if he kills someone, right? So in that case, so let's say, a non-Jew or a Jew, it doesn't really matter. If a non-Jew is part of that, is part of the army, kills people, it's part of the job, right? So we don't look at that as we're not looking at as murder, right? We're definitely not looking at it as murder, right? It's part of the job. Going out and killing people for we didn't have to. That's a different issue. That's a different issue. If it's self-defense, good. If you have to kill people, that's what you have to do, right? No, I can avoid military service. Yes, they should, right? A lot of Jews had problems in Russia. They got conscripted. And getting conscripted in the Russian army was like, give up your Judaism, right? Totally give up your Judaism. So, a lot of people, did all kinds of things, try and get out of the army for exactly that reason, right? So, should a non-Jew try and avoid it? Sure. What if it's national service? What if it's national service? So that's the whole thing here. This whole thing going on here that, other Orthodox Jews don't serve in the army, right? In general, now they're trying to make this whole law that they should, so whatever, it's a much bigger discussion. But a non-Jew, they don't want to serve, they shouldn't have to. If it's national service, if it's national service, I would say try and get out of it. If you can. Definitely if you can. Someone said a few groups, let's say, attack and shooting, others are in neighbor's nation. Slaughter, kidnap, rape local villages. Yeah. A few both the local soldiers and other locals, I don't call that murder. Going again, it's like, I'm not gonna say it's an eye for an eye, right? That you gotta be careful. You can't say, an eye for eye doesn't mean, they kill you, you kill them, right? An eye for eye means damages, right? Different reasons, which I'm not gonna get into now, but if they go and they wipe out a whole village, yeah. Now again, if the person's in the army, I'm not talking about vigilantes. Vigilantes be forbidden, right? Or clan things or whatever, that'd be forbidden, right? But in this case, if that's part of war, yeah, so then that's all right. That's part of war, right? That wouldn't be an issue. So someone here says, we've been under the no-hide laws, but only taking out those who wanted to murder others, more of self-defense. Could be. It could be, again, that's a deterrent. If some come in and like, wipe out a whole village or a part of a village, in your job, in the army, you have to go after these people, whatever, that's part of the job. That's 100% part of the job. So that's not vigilantism, and that's not murder. That's, we'll call that justice, so to speak. Let me see other questions. Someone asked, I saw a rabbi discussing finance on YouTube, saying that action trumps intention. Yeah, I think that's true. In other words, what a person does shows what their intention was, right? That, it's the same thing if someone, this basketball player mentioned this before, was live streaming, I don't know, playing a video game or whatever, and And he made an anti-Semitic, comment because that's what he believed. That was inside him. That's what he said, right? He didn't say, "Oh, I didn't mean to say it." He said it, right? That was his intention, right? Actions show intention for sure. Now, sometimes you can say, "Oh, I didn't mean to do that," but you meant it. Essentially, you meant it because it shows the action, right? It shows the action. Because the end result is what you intended to do. That's like it's like on Shabbos. Call that Meleches Machsheves. The person does something, they do the action the way they wanted to do it. Right? In other words, they threw a ball from a private domain or public thoroughfare. And they intended to throw it far, and they did. So that was their intention. Now, what happens if they throw it as far, but their intention was to do that? Okay, so then the whole discussion whether they did their intention, they didn't do their intention, but what they set out to do is their intention. That I think is true. That I think is true. Someone here mentioned our court system isn't, halachically run. You're right. You're right. Right. But at the end of the day, it's the law of the land. Right. So not everything the law of the land, if the law of the land says you don't circumcise your kid, you still have to circumcise your kid. Right. You got to try and figure out a way how to do it where you're not going to get killed like they did in Russia. People were most of nefesh were, tremendous self-sacrifice. So law of the land is another whole, whatever, it's another whole topic here. Another whole topic here. Someone asked, can a religious Jew serve in the army in the U.S. or not? I don't think it's a good thing to do, but they could. Right? I wouldn't say it's forbidden. Right? You're helping defend the country. Yeah, they could. I think it have other issues, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's. I wouldn't say it's forbidden. I wouldn't say it's forbidden today. They, if they wanted to, could they? Yeah, they could. Is it you want to ask if it's a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. Definitely not a good thing. But they could do it. They could do it in theory. I'm gonna have to run in a second here. Let me just see. Someone's gonna meet with a basin. Very good. Glad to hear. Pray for your success. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. I just every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern time, 5 o'clock Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos on Q&As, ethics for our fathers, book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBI CHAIM COFFMAN @gmail.com. Wish you a good beginning of the day, middle of the day.